Hello, friends. This is our trusty assistant, Betsy. She's going to help us have a Sunday school lesson. I'm at the entrance of Jerusalem in Minecraft server FAC on the Agape Creation Network. This is a historical creation of the city of Jerusalem. It's accurately portrayed based on some historical maps from the Israeli archive, and I think they've done quite well. Anyway, this is the entrance to the gate of the city, and when people would make legal transactions, when they would come to the city, the tax office would be like right here, where there would be a tax collector, and any possessions that you would take through this city, you'd have to pay taxes on, especially animals and such. And on this side, there would be the city mayor. He'd probably have a little office here, and this is why we think Lot may have been the mayor of the city after his uncle saved the city the first time. We think he was put into a position of authority, and anyway, he would have been kind of overseeing land sales and things like that. When people would sell land, the selling party would come here in front of the mayor, and then the receiving party would also come here in front of the mayor, and they would trade sandals, and that would signify a completion of the deal. And there would be two witnesses, signifying that this did occur. Okay, and so that's an example of what would happen in the temple gate. So this was kind of like the courtroom of ancient Israel. And the first courtroom that would represent anything that resembles today's courtrooms. But what I want to talk about is the Israelites. You know, they have to once a year bring all the animals from the different areas of the continent to Jerusalem, and they would travel hundreds of miles, travel through many cities, and each city they traveled through, they'd have to pay this tax. So a $100 sheep that was their best sheep of their flock, by the time they got here, probably would have cost them in the range of $400 or $500 maybe. And then they would travel all the way through the city with their animals and their livestock to make the sacrifice that they were required to make for salvation. Oh, hey, Zacchaeus. It looks like that tree needs to be a little bit taller so you can see. Anyway, they would travel all the way through the city with their animals and such, and they'd have a schedule that they'd have to follow so they could make this sacrifice, because there were so many Jews that would have to come to the courtroom and do this. They would pass this gate. The Gentiles weren't allowed past this area. They were kept here. It was the court of the Gentiles. Women, children under 12, and Gentiles had to stay back here. If you were a male Jew, you could come to this area, and often Jesus would preach like from this area, or he might preach in that area back there. But anyway, if you were a male Jew, you got to enter this area, okay? And there was rooms and such for cleaning. This is where they would shave their heads and do their rituals that they would do, and then they would come over here. Those animals that we saw, there was a separate entrance that the animals would come through, and they would be examined by the priest, like over here. And the Jews weren't allowed to cross this line. Only a Levite or a priest could cross this line. And they would present their animal, which was probably denied for some reason, and they would say, oh, it's okay. Now remember, they paid already $500 or so for the animal in taxes. And they said, just convert your money over to temple tax money, or temple money, and you can buy one of ours. And so they would do that, and then they would sacrifice one of these lambs up here, and the priest would, oh, there's Caiaphas. He was the high priest during Jesus' time. he would make the sacrifice for the family for the whole year, and that would secure that family's salvation for that year, for any past sins that they had committed. And then the fat of the animal, of course, burned up, but there was some meat left over, and that was left to feed the Levites and the priest. Anyway, that's a little bit of the temple sacrifice that the Jews would have to go through. Now, the high priest again and the Levites were the only ones that could pass this area, and they could actually go into the temple. And in the temple, there's the table of showbread and this giant candelabra here. This is where that miracle of the oil happened that lasted longer than it should have with the limited oil, one of the miracles of the Israelites. And then there's the veil that enters into the Holy of Holies inside the temple. And it was ripped from top to bottom when Jesus died on the cross, which was another miracle established at the dying of Christ. Now, no one was ever allowed to enter back here except for one priest that was selected from all the villages for that year, and he would go back here, and he had to wear bells on his arms and his legs in case he fell, and there was a rope tied around to his waist. If he was considered unworthy, they would hear him fall and they would drag him out. But he'd go back here and he'd wash his hands, and then he'd go over here to the incense burner and he'd burn some incense to the Lord. And this is where Zechariah saw an angel, and he went mute because he didn't believe what the angel was saying to him, or at least he doubted at some point because of his wife's barrenness. Anyway, this is the Ark of the Covenant, and inside the Ark were the Ten Commandments and the staff of Aaron, which bloomed, and some other artifacts in there. Anyway, he would make the sacrifice, and then he would come back out, and then there might be some revelation that we'd have that he would come all the way out the temple, and he would tell his people that had traveled with him, and also the high priest, if he had any kind of vision or anything like that from the experience of going into the temple, or what the Lord had told him. And that is just an example of some of the rituals that would go on in the time of ancient history of the Israelites. Thank you. Join us next time for another Sunday school lesson.